This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Guess you could say we're back to normalcy this week. After two lengthy but still relatively enjoyable Friday and Monday podcasts last week, we're back to the regular Friday format, the Retro Review Series. And I hope everybody enjoyed the Starrcade 87 recap. I thought it was a fun show to go back and watch. Definitely put a lot of things into perspective. Just the kind of shape that Crockett Promotions was really in by this point in 87, going into 88. And while we're delving into all the historical content and trying to pick out all the good stuff where we can find it, meanwhile, you got all this crazy crap happening in the world of modern wrestling. Within the span of the last week and a half, we've gone from seeing one of the worst things in wrestling all year on AEW pay-per-view to one of the biggest highlights in wrestling all year, that being the CM Punk return to the WWE, obviously. I don't even know how something like that is humanly possible, to simultaneously have the worst and best thing in wrestling happen within the same week. You know, it was more like 2 weeks, but you get what I mean. Very close proximity. And just when I think wrestling is completely incapable of drawing a reaction out of me, then something like that happens. And I'm reminded, nope. They still manage to blow me away every now and then. I thought I was immune to surprises in wrestling, just because they happen so infrequently anymore. But once in a blue moon, you get those special moments like that, and it's all worth it. But we're here to talk about classic wrestling today, so we'll save the WWE talk for the Monday show. Make sure if you're checking out the FSWR channel for the first time, subscribe, comment, like the show. Make sure you come back and check us out on either YouTube or Rumble each week for new content. We are in the post-Starrcade phase of Crockett, so that's on today's agenda. Likewise, World Class is kicking up its Thanksgiving Star Wars special, preparing for a big Christmas event in December. So a lot of things happening there. And then we got Mid-South, which is basically here to balance everything out, doing a stellar job of furthering along some interesting stories and angles on TV. Coming up on two of my favorite years for Mid-South, 83 and 84. But, as we typically do, we'll go ahead and dive into things with the NWA report. I'm going to try to do this without gagging every 3 seconds. I'm currently trying to drink water from a coffee tumbler because I left my water tumbler in the car. And the only thing I taste right now is coffee residue. Maybe I can block it out, though. So with Starrcade 87 in the passenger seat, we are now onward and forward to 1988, and all these subsequent big happenings yet to come. Not to make light of Starrcade immediately and throw it to the back burner, but that's pretty much what Tony Schiavone did at the cold open this week. He goes, "Folks, Starrcade is in the books, and we'll have some highlight footage later on to air. But in the meantime, hey, we have a new junior heavyweight champion, Nelson Royal." Yes. Them announcing Nelson Royal as the new NWA Junior Heavyweight Champion. That had to take precedence over their most recent pay-per-view event just 2 days prior. Nelson Royal, the world's Junior Heavyweight Champion. I will give anybody $5 that can offhand name the previous champion before Nelson. And if you say Denny Brown, fuck off. Now, obviously, they did draw attention to the show throughout the program, and a lot of it was covered during the various promo segments. We had Nikita Koloff out at the beginning here, sporting his off-the-rack oversized Adidas sweater. And he basically took a minute or two to put over the Terry Taylor match and how he gave Nikita the fight of his life. But since Nikita is now the unified, undisputed TV champion, his focus is now directed toward the Bunkhouse Stampede in January. Of course, the entire time I'm watching this, I keep thinking to myself, doesn't Nikita lose the TV title, like, very soon? I mean, we're coming up on the point where he's going to be dealing with a lot of family problems. I believe it's his wife, if I'm not mistaken. There's a pretty significant period in like early 88 where he's just gone from television. And I think you remember he comes back with a full head of hair and totally changes his look. It was very weird. So if you were a big fan of Bald Nikita, embrace it while you can. Because this guy's going to be going through a rough patch in the coming year. Then going back to the ring, we had the Rock and Roll Express in a quick squash with Trent Knight and Larry Stevens. Ricky and Robert coming out to some pretty god-awful dub network music. No idea what the hell that was supposed to be. Sounded like a bad redub of Kamala's Mid-South music. So obviously this was taped like 2 or 3 days after the grueling scaffold match with the Midnights. Naturally, Ricky and Robert are out here working totally fine. I mean, I get the shows are taped, but if we're supposed to believe this is real, shouldn't they have at least been favoring some body limbs or something? Maybe have some athletic tape to bandage up the invisible wounds? Of course, this is all before the Midnight's promo afterwards, where beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan are out there no-selling everything too. In their case, it was even more egregious, because they were the ones that took the fucking scaffold bumps. Meanwhile, they're just standing out there with Cornette and Big Bubba like it's another day at the office. Totally fine. Oh, by the way, the Rock and Roll won that match with a double drop kick. In case you needed clarification on that, I don't know why you would. And then it's to the booth for Jim Cornette and the Midnights. Corny's already cutting the heel promo to Ricky and Robert, who have now magically disappeared off camera, calling them mental midgets and making fun of their parents for being alcoholics. Of course, they don't bother coming back out to slap the guy in the mouth. But, well, it's a Cornette promo, which means in addition to it being great, he also spouts off like 1,000 words per minute. So unless you're watching at half speed, it's borderline impossible to keep track of anything he's talking about. He basically called the Rock and Roll Express lucky ducks, managing to survive the scaffold match by the skin of their teeth. But the Midnights are still the U.S. Tag Champions, which means they're still in the driver's seat. They talked about the Bunkhouse Stampede, mentioning that last year, Dusty screwed Big Bubba over in Pittsburgh and took away a large sum of cash from him. To which he then said, "This year will be a different story." And that is when I noted, it sure will be, Jim. It sure will be. Nothing else much to it. We did get Corny dropping that infamous quote that got him in hot water with the NWA when he came back as a commentator several years ago. Y'all remember the quote, "Big Bubba's the only man that can strap a bucket of fried chicken on his back and ride across Ethiopia"? Yeah. That one probably rings a bell. The exact line that Cornette used in 2019 during a taped Trevor Murdoch match. Literally word for word. The exact same fucking copy and paste quote. My have times changed. In 1987, total blimp on the radar. 2019, basically ousted Cornette from the professional wrestling business. Just a harmless little passing joke that probably went over most people's heads at the time. Because, people actually used to have a sense of humor. More accurately, left-leaning people used to have a sense of humor back in the day. Now they're the same people that are front-running the cancel culture movement. In all their blue hair splendor. I actually forgot that until I heard Jim say it here. That was a reference to Big Bubba Rogers. Go figure. Then we come back for Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin versus the Gladiators, where the only thing I got out of it was learning that the NWA promoters randomly decided on a whim that Hayes and Garvin are the best tag team on the globe. How they drew that conclusion, I couldn't tell you. But, I guess they needed some babyface challengers to wrestle Tully and Arn for the world tag titles, since they basically have none at this point. Discount Ricky and Robert, who already have one foot out the door anyway. And then there's the Road Warriors thing, which I don't think we need to bring up again. So I guess this really was their best option. Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin, who again at this point were not even recognized as the Freebirds. They were just a makeshift tag team. Really goes to show just how weak the division was at this point in 87. He lost a lot of teams. Garvin won with the brainbuster. Nothing else to say about it. And from there, we pitch back to Tony at the booth to set up the highlight reel for Starrcade. The U.S. Heavyweight title showdown between Luger and Rhodes. And if you want to hear the full breakdown of that match, just go listen to our Starrcade recap from last week's podcast. I'm not going to do the entire recap again here. The end result, as we know, was Dusty winning the belt after some chicanery with chairs, which really wasn't all that complex. The angle was JJ throws chair over the cage, Luger goes to grab the chair, and then Dusty DDTs him on the chair and wins. But after that match went down, we had some exclusive press conference footage. Don't worry, Tony Khan wasn't present. So I'm pretty sure everybody got out of there before 2 a.m. Nor was Dusty chomping on Mindy's Bakery muffins. Missed opportunity there. That would have been iconic. Now, it's actually a very serious occasion for Dusty. He explains that Luger gave him one of the hardest fought matches of his entire career. And right now, Dusty is physically beat up. He's hurt. And he's contemplating whether or not now is the time to hang up the boots and call it a career. So he's going to go home for a while and think about it. And of course, this is the point where all the marks go ballistic and start motherfucking Dusty Rhodes. I can't believe that son of a bitch! He books himself over Luger at the biggest pay-per-view all year for 87, and now he's threatening to walk out of the company with the title? What an asshole! Well, you know, with hindsight being 2020, we can reflect back on it and say, didn't exactly lead to the end of Dusty's career. But I can understand the frustration, especially for the older fans, the ones that were already avid Dusty haters. They tried to pull this shit with Roman after next year's Mania, like having him beat Cody again for the title, and then come out on Raw the next night and tease retirement. Yeah. I'd probably be calling bullshit too. Luckily, this is all part of an angle, so we can breathe a sigh of relief. It did not actually end up being Dusty's final send-off, because that would have sucked. Taking the U.S. title hostage. Sounds like a Dusty thing. Up next was Larry Zbyszko versus Bob Riddle, which might have been the greatest textbook example of a legend doing the most while simultaneously doing nothing at the same time. It's all built around the psychology of Larry working the fans, just being a super effective villain. It's funny because at first, you get the fans all over Larry. They're just tearing into this guy. But it also sounded like they were chanting, "We want Larry." And it took me until Tony Schiavone started mentioning Barry Windham to where I was like, oh, they're saying we want Barry. So it appears they are indeed doing a Barry-Larry feud. Could you maybe not come up with another babyface for Larry to feud with? Someone that didn't have a name that rhymed with his? Just makes the whole thing way too confusing. But I'm not even joking when I say Larry hardly had to lift a finger in this match, and he still worked the people into a tirade. They were calling him a wimp, calling him a chicken, chanting, "Go home, Larry, go home." I was like, this fucking guy has done nothing but stand and yell at the people. I don't even think they did an actual lockup until like 3 minutes into the match. Of course, the whole thing's made better by the fact that after they stood around and did virtually nothing the whole time, even though it was more like Bob Riddle who stood around and did nothing the whole time, of course they still fucked the finish up. As Larry goes to give Riddle a neck breaker, and Riddle had absolutely no idea how to take this move. So Larry's trying to take this guy down as a shoot without breaking his neck legitimately. Finally, after like 10 seconds of struggling with this fucking idiot, Larry just goes, "Fuck this." And he does a terribly sloppy neck break spot where I'm pretty sure he just dumped Riddle on his shoulder and then Larry fell on top of him. A career low. And let it be known to all the NXT young lions, there's still hope for you. These NWA jobbers give the term outlaw indie wrestling a whole new meaning of terrible. The question is, where do they find these fucking jabronis? And following up on the Larry stuff, he was at ringside with Baby Doll and Tony for an interview. Well, first, Larry touched on a recent angle with Barry Windham, which I'll talk about in a sec. But Baby Doll's trying to psych him up and talk about how he should go after the big dogs, Dusty and Flair specifically. And she even says, "I know a thing or two about Dusty." To which I said, "I'm sure you do, Baby Doll. I remember those 86 Bash Tour tapes. We know you were good at getting around." But as they roll the VTR, I'm thinking this was UWF footage because JR was on commentary. And I'm almost positive DiBiase was on color too. This had to have been right before DiBiase went to the WWF. So I'm not sure when this footage was taken from, but had to have been in like the spring of '87, right? So they're really digging back in the archives here. But we see Zbyszko in the closing minutes working a match with Barry Windham. And right at the tail end, Baby Doll feeds Zbyszko the tape Nux gimmick so he can get the visual pin over Windham to win the coveted Western States Heritage Championship. Because, yeah, that belt is still a thing, apparently. But it's merely a tease. Because while the heels are celebrating, in runs Tim Horner, of all people, and he's drawing Pee Wee Anderson's attention to Larry's ring trunks, which are now concealing the gimmick. And I will tell you, you have never seen a heterosexual male so eager to reach for a man's junk than Tim Horner was going after those fucking brass knucks, dude. He's just grabbing a handful of Larry's Johnson, pulling the gimmick out, flashing it up for the world to see. I'm like, did Tim not see anything wrong with this before he went to grab Larry? Moreover, why did Larry let him? I'd have fucking kneed that guy in the jaw. So naturally, Pee Wee sees the gimmick. He does the reverse decision. And the belt is returned to Windham, rightfully. And now Larry's on a hunting spree for all the gold in the NWA. And he basically wants us to know that the top guy should just hand the belt over to him. That's what I got out of it. It was a really good segment, though. The squash and the UWF videotape. Then we come back for a Ric Flair promo. And once again, he's the man. He's got the NWA World's Heavyweight title in his possession. Back on top of the mountain, where he belongs. Letting us know that he is now a 5-time heavyweight champion, as the studio crowd relishes in the moment. And again, they took us back to Chicago, showed the closing 3 minutes of the match. I will reiterate what I said in the Starrcade recap. Do yourself a favor. If you have the Peacock subscription, or just internet access, period, go watch that match. I still think it's a very underrated title match. Doesn't get praised enough for just how good it really was. On that card, especially. But now that Flair's the champ again, he's here to let us know that he's going to be more obnoxious and more over the top than ever before. Only merely scratching the surface of just how crazy and over the top he would wind up during the dying days of Nitro, when he totally just stopped giving a fuck. That was peak Nature Boy. He wasn't handcuffing himself to the ring post quite yet, taking off his pants and just going fucking ballistic. But, he also did his classic, "You may not like it, but you're going to learn to love it" line. And then he told Dusty he should strongly consider retirement. Total throwaway line, but just to be a dick, I guess. Oh, by the way, for the record, yes, Ric Flair is still technically supposed to be a heel, despite the contrary evidence to the way the crowd reacts to him. Then we had Sting going over Dave Isley in a quick match. Still super raw and super green. But he's getting better with each passing performance. I'm telling you, man, I think that 6-man really did a lot for him. You know, surrounding him with all those great talents. It was almost like a workshop class in a lot of ways. Well, yeah, they let Sting get in there and do some stuff and be involved. But he was also watching from the sidelines and kind of learning the psychology of when and where to execute things. So it was a really good place for him to be. And he was a quick learner. I think Sting gets a bad reputation for never really truly having a passion for the wrestling business and not really learning how to adapt on the fly, but I disagree, man. He came a long way in his early career. I mean, hence why 3 months from now, he's headlining the first Clash of Champions with fucking Ric Flair. You're going to try and sit here and argue that guy didn't make any progress in the business? Sometimes I just don't even know how to respond to people. And he pretty much made his intentions clear in his promo. Right at the top of the hour strategically. There was no way that was accidental. They were trying to get stragglers to watch this. As many eyeballs as they could get. They said, hey, go have that crazy guy in the green face paint do a rambling promo. That'll draw in some people. And it probably did. That's the amazing part. This was so Sting circa 1987, but it's phenomenal. He's doing a total off-the-cuff promo, totally uncomfortable, has no idea what he's doing or what he's talking about. He's just, anything that comes to the top of his head, he's just throwing it out there. He says he's been through the ups and downs in this sport. Tag partners have come and gone. But when it comes to Ric Flair, he's the guy that everybody has their sights set on. And while he may respect Flair for what he's done and contributed to the sport of wrestling, when he and Sting get in the ring face to face, the story will be much different. And he did the signature Sting howls, which he actually explained were his way of releasing tension. Okay. Not really sure what that means, but I will not ask for specifics. This is great. Tony asks him to talk about the bunkhouse stampede, to which Sting goes, and I quote, "The what?" And then he just sort of walked off mid-sentence and totally ignored Tony's question. And Tony didn't follow up. Incredible. By the way, Sting still ranks among my top 5 all-time favorite wrestlers. The more I watch of him in 87, this super green deer in the headlights version of Sting that's just flying by the seat of his pants trying to make it, I think he might end up surpassing Taker. I didn't think anybody could beat out The Undertaker in my all-time faves, but Sting is slowly giving him a run for his money. I mean, just to put it in context, we're doing those retro Raw reports right now from 94. Haven't been all that enthralled with a lot of Taker's work. Revisionist history, I guess. But Sting, that guy's on the ball. He's great. And then in one of the most baffling transitions I've ever seen, they go from Sting to Jim Crockett Jr. Talk about polar opposite personalities. So he's out there to share his take on the Dusty situation. He explains that the announcement caught him off guard at the press conference. But since Dusty is the 2-time Bunkhouse Stampede champion, he does owe it to the fans to be present for the 88 Bunkhouse Stampede. So, translation, Dusty tried to take a vacation and Jim put the kibosh on it. Dusty said, "I want to do a retirement tour, Daddy." And Jim Crockett said, "That doesn't work for me, brother." Probably one of the few times he legitimately put his foot down, too, and told a top guy no. How cathartic that must have felt. To know that you were the man in charge. I know a guy that could gravely benefit from telling the boys no. Funny enough, he's actually running a wrestling promotion right now. He might be able to actually sleep at night. God forbid. So then we go to the Midnights versus the Thunderfoots, or Thunderfeet, depending on whether or not we ask the Hobbits. This is epic. In the first 20 seconds of the match, Cornette is already burying every single job guy they've ever faced on NWA television, saying the Midnights have run through every combination just about. So in story, Bobby and Stan took it upon themselves to offer the Thunderfoots a match, seeing as how they were the Central States Tag Team Champions. I nearly spit my coffee out when I heard that line. That Thunderfoot 1 and 2 were the reigning Central States Tag Team Champions of the world. The Thunderfoots. Wow. What the fuck was going on with the Central States region in 87? Did the tag division consist of these two guys? So naturally, Bobby and Stan beat the shit out of him. Cornette joked that David Crockett was not around this week, which he thought was unfortunate. And, well, after the Midnights won with the flapjack, Cornette was already mid-promo at the podium talking about God knows what. The only thing I got out of it was when he was talking about Stan and Bobby living in poor conditions. He joked about the Fall Leaves committing suicide. Yeah. I would not classify this as one of Cornette's all-time better promos. There was some bunkhouse talk in there as well, but again, I didn't write a whole lot down. Then coming back from commercial, we had Lex Luger out for a promo with JJ. But JJ didn't do a whole lot here. This was all about giving Luger the platform to reflect back on the match with Dusty. And, for lack of better terms, anyone that didn't see that eventual Luger babyface push coming, they were either blind, deaf, or dumb. This was quite the promo from Mr. Luger. Basically talked about how it was all around a good night for the Horsemen. But when it comes to Dusty Rhodes, Luger is man enough to look him in the face and tell him that he was the better performer. He says there are few greats in this sport that rise above the average wrestler. Dusty is not average, but Luger is also among the elite level. He knows that he is destined for greatness, and Starrcade 87 was merely the beginning. He also took off his shirt and flexed, but that's sort of conventional for a Lex Luger promo. Joking aside, though, it was really good. For a guy that was never really gifted on the stick, unless he was super motivated, this was definitely a case where he was motivated. It was a very passionate, fiery promo. Yes, he put over his comrades, but he acknowledged that Dusty is an all-time great. He put over his credentials and said he has much more to explore in the world of wrestling, and we're only witnessing the very beginning of it, which was indeed true. It was a pretty standard babyface-like promo, without them necessarily flipping him outright. And again, we're coming up on a big turning point with the Horsemen, some of which was alluded to on this show. So keep all of this in your back pocket, because it's a slow burn build, but it'll become imperative later on. And then we went to the ring for Dr. Death versus Tommy Angel. Here's everything I wrote. Couple takedowns from Williams, military press, football tackle, Oklahoma Stampede for the win, which was followed by him doing a promo, and actually a pretty good little promo at that. He put over the match with Barry, said that he'd offer him a title rematch anytime and any place he wants. But for now, it's all about putting the focus on the Bunkhouse Stampede. 35 men, however many it is that are going to be in the ring at a given time. By the way, I like how that number just keeps changing from segment to segment on this show. No one can get their bearings straight. It's 20, 25, 30, no, 35 men. Someone will probably come out later on and say it'll be 50 men. Now, like I said, it was actually a solid promo from Dr. Death. I mean, he's had some clunkers on the mic lately during these syndicated promos, but this was actually pretty good. He did call himself a UWF fossil, which was ironic considering the fact that I'm pretty sure he was like 28 or 29 years old at the time of this recording. Then, of course, you look at him here and he doesn't look a day under 40. Then you realize by 1997, he looks exactly the fucking same. That is a dude that never aged. So here's the point of the program where we got to hear from Ronnie Garvin, his take on the whole cage match at Starrcade. And he's talking about the fact that for 2 months, it was the greatest feeling in the world to come out here and be able to call himself the world's champion. But now that Ronnie is the challenger again, he doesn't have the gold. And the only thing that means is that Ronnie has to double the training and double his work ethic to climb back to the top of the mountain again. And of course, while he's trying to fire up and get the people behind him, here come Michael Hayes and Jimmy Garvin with Precious. And it's one of those deals where Hayes has to try to sell Starrcade as the greatest pay-per-view of all time, which is a load of crap, and everybody knows it. But he's still trying to get everybody to drink the corporate Kool-Aid. He says that Ronnie gave that match everything he had, but he's still the champ in his eyes. To which I noted, that's funny, because I don't see Ron currently holding a belt right now. And a few snide comments later, after the babyfaces were done suckling at the teat of Ronnie Garvin, that is when I realized that really is all she wrote for Ron Garvin's main event push. You know, while you got his buddies out there doing the whole hoorah speech, the reality does sink in. This was pretty much it for Ron Garvin as a main eventer in this sport. Not to get too intricate with the details going into 88, but I mean, if y'all don't know what's coming down the pike with Ron Garvin in the coming year, buckle up, because it'll leave you floored. From there, we go back to the ring for Ron Simmons versus Rick Steiner. Phew. Talk about a hoss fight. Man, if they'd have put this match on pay-per-view in a few years and let those guys sort of flesh out their careers, this could have been a hell of a money feud. Especially in like 92 or 93 when Simmons was the world champion. But this was less about the match and more so about the story angle they advanced here. A little bit of early teasing for the Varsity Club business. So they're out there having the match, and when they come back from break, Kevin Sullivan is now on the floor directing traffic for Rick. And I don't know, I guess you could say Rick was in a trance as he started acting more heelish all of a sudden and following Sullivan's commands. Perhaps he had a spell put on him, I don't know. But eventually he dumped Simmons over the top rope for the blatant DQ. And then he just walks off with Sullivan as Teddy Long raises Ron's hand. It was a bit confusing with the way they shot it, though, because they didn't immediately call for the bell after Steiner threw Simmons out. So at first, it kind of just looked like he was bailing on the match. But, no. Regardless, the takeaway here is that Steiner and Sullivan are now together with much more that needs to be explained. Tony said that Sullivan had been in his ear lately, saying he needs to take a different path because he's been associating with the wrong kind of people. So, again, story development for a later date. Right now, we're just kind of waiting to see how it all goes. But without getting into spoilers, I'll just say varsity club business. Decent match while it lasted. But again, the angle was more important. Then we had our Spam Slam of the week, which is slowly becoming my favorite part of the show. This week's plug was Dr. Death's Press Slam, which I guess was fitting. I'm waiting for the week we get the Mighty Wilbur giving Paul Jones the big splash. And then we can say, Paul Jones was the spam. On the subject of spamming and slamming, Tully and Arn did some of that with Rocky King and Chance McQuaid. This fucking Chance McQuaid is still around. Can't believe it. Haven't seen him in a while. And Tully and Arn worked him over extensively. Arn gave him the double-A spinebuster, followed by a Tully slingshot for the 3. I always love it when they get Rocky King teaming with some Ham and Egger. They'll let Rocky get like 2 minutes of shine, and then the rest of the time he'll just stand on the apron while the other guys beat the shit out of the green jobber. Probably out of respect for Rocky because they actually saw something in him. And then we had one of the best things on the whole show. This little 4 Horsemen promo / huddle segment. This was quite the episodic bit of television here. Okay, so you got everybody out there. Naturally, Tully and Arn are doing the bulk of the talking for this one, since they're coming off their recent TV win. They're running down the Road Warriors. Tully's joking about how they're probably at the gym right now doing their bench press workouts, because that's all they know how to do is be power lifters and meatheads. And that's all fine and dandy. It's just typical heel stuff. And then Arn gets on the mic. And this moment right here is quite literally some of the best piece of production detail I think I've ever seen them draw attention to on the Superstation, because it's so subtle, but you know it had to be done on purpose. Because Arn starts going off on how there's a void in the Horsemen right now. Even though the Horsemen are a collection of champions, not everybody can claim to be a champion at the moment. He says that while some guys are focusing their attention on movies and TV deals and commercial advertisements, Arn's still thinking about wrestling. The thing that got him into this profession and will continue to keep him in this profession. I did like the subtle nod there to Dusty with a comment about major motion pictures and sitcoms, daddy. But here's the caveat. While Arn is cutting this pretty underhanded promo, like, you know he's directing his attention to somebody, but he's not mentioning names. He doesn't say anybody in particular. He's being very vague in his description. You know who wasn't being vague, though? Was the camera guy. Because who should he be filming the entire time but Lex Luger, who was methodically standing behind Arn the entire time, glaring a hole right through him. Probably thinking to himself, who does this guy think he is? Calling me out like that? Mocking the fact that I don't have a championship? That I don't care about the sport of wrestling because all I'm focused on is movies and acting careers. Again, it's very, very, very subtle. They didn't have Luger cause a scene. But if you watch them, if you look at the facials, you can see the gears turning. It's the first time where the Horsemen huddle didn't seem to click. Because even Flair in this promo, he's like, oh, what Double A is trying to say is blah, 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 blah. Because I think even Flair kind of picked up on it, because he's looking at Luger like, I think Arn's stepping over the line a little bit here. He noticed that Arn rocked the boat a little bit, and I think that got Luger sideways. But it was an excellent piece of television. I love this segment. Like, you see them planting the seeds for a lot of story direction going into 88. And the big one all kind of starts here with the Horsemen dissension. Now we just wait and see how they explain who paid off the camera guy to film Luger during that whole exchange. Oh. Plot twist. Then we come back for a rather interesting TV main event. The featured six-man for this week's show, a six-man tag, Barry Windham, Ricky Santana, and the Mighty Wilbur versus Ivan Koloff, the Warlord, and the Barbarian. And the first thing I noted here, as soon as that graphic flashed up, poor Barry Windham, dude. That guy drew the short straw this week. They said, we need a third babyface. Which top guy wants to be a part of the Paul Jones Army six-man tag this week? Barry Windham, thanks for volunteering, bud. Go out there, have a good time. I mean, you could tell he wasn't into this. So they're out there doing this match. It's comically awful. There's a six-way spot on the floor where everybody just kind of looked like they had no idea where they were supposed to be or what they were doing. So they all just started windmilling each other with fake punches. Meanwhile, Ivan grabs Teddy for the distraction so the other heels can beat up Wilbur on the floor. And I'm going to use air quotes when I say distraction, because when I say Ivan grabbed Teddy, I literally mean he grabbed him and he started molesting him. I don't know. But eventually, after they roll Wilbur back into the ring, they end up having him fend off the entire heel team by himself by grabbing Ivan's chain and threatening to hit everybody with it. I was like, it took you 5 minutes into the match to figure that out? When Ivan's chain was just hanging on the ring post? And then one of the most baffling things on the entire show, in this match, they got the heat on Barry Windham, the best fucking worker in the match by a country mile. They had him as the babyface in peril so that Ricky Santana could make the comeback right before they ran out of time and had to end the show. Mind-boggling. Out of all three babyfaces, the Mighty Wilbur was probably in the ring the most. Meanwhile, Barry's just a bit player the entire time. And he had to sell. And like I said, finally they end the show during Santana's comeback. So we don't even get a decisive winner. The short answer is nobody because they booked this fucking match. I mean, I guess the other notable takeaway here was that I believe it's the first sighting of the Powers of Pain working together. I don't think they were recognized as such until later on in 88. But that was kind of a cool teaser. I mean, as a placeholder match to run out the remaining airtime, it wasn't that bad. The Paul Jones Army stuff is death television at this point, but I mean, the people are still somewhat into it, so I can't entirely poon it. And the show did have some pretty good story development in a lot of the key areas. Never found out how Nelson Royal won the junior heavyweight title. Might have to do some research on that. Pretty up and down show all around. But again, I love the stuff they're doing with the Horsemen right now. I like seeing the development of guys like Luger and Sting and even Rick Steiner and all the involvement with Kevin Sullivan. And they hit on a lot of material this week and made for a pretty enjoyable program. You know, I know we're still coming off the mild stench of Starrcade, and it's going to take a while to get over. The bunkhouse build is what everybody's primarily focusing on, though. So that'll be the majority of the TV plugs in the meantime. Plus, you know, house shows and spot shows and things like that. But we've only got a few more weeks before the end of 87. And then we're ready for a brand new spanking year. And boy, is 88 a very interesting year for NWA WCW. Likewise with Mid-South Wrestling. Here's a great way to kickstart my notes. Bill Watts talks sports. Not only did Bill talk sports, but he also made sure to establish that pro wrestling is more legit than pro sports. More than basketball, football, soccer, baseball, underwater basket weaving, you name it. Now, of course, the million-dollar question, what's the context? That was basically so Watts could put over that just because pro football players are strong and muscular, it does not mean they're able to set bench press records. Because that's what determines an athlete, you see. It's all about how much weight you can press. And as we all know, I mean, they've only hammered the footage into our heads like 15 times in the last 3 weeks. Mr. USA Tony Atlas set the bench press record at 550 pounds. So they re-aired the footage for a 16th time. Just so Watts can make sure we all know pro wrestling is the shit. At least it used to be. Before the Cucamonga Cocksucker Commission took over and started introducing all the ballet gymnastics. And all the indie marks started fapping off to it. Now pro wrestling is nothing more than synchronized parkour. And I can promise you, there ain't a lot of pro wrestlers today that could bench press 550 pounds. So from there, we go to Houston for some more highlight footage, with Ted DiBiase joining Boyd Pierce at the commentary booth. And he's providing some context for how the match came to be. It is him and Tiger Conway Jr., a North American heavyweight title defense. And this is just perfect professional wrestling on every level. So they dub over DiBiase's commentary, and because it's just him calling the match, it's totally slanted in his favor. Anytime DiBiase was in trouble or Conway had the match going in his favor, DiBiase's pointing out all these artificial bullshit scenarios to make it seem like Conway was cheating. Like in the beginning, Conway's chasing DiBiase around the ring, trying to get the upper hand from the opening bell. So, of course, DiBiase goes, and as you can see right here, Conway tried to attack me from behind as I was getting the official's instructions. Never gave me a chance to get out of the starting block. There's a deal where Conway goes to shake his hand, but outsmarts DiBiase so he could pop him in the mouth. DiBiase goes, and see, that's just unprofessionalism right there. I'm just trying to have a good old clean fight. And this no good SOB is using every cheating tactic in the book to gain the upper hand. This is where I noted, we need a segment on every SmackDown where Roman Reigns comes out to do full coverage of his own matches. If they dedicated one segment every Friday to a Roman Reigns commentary reel, where he just sits down at the booth and dishonestly calls all of his previous title defenses, no cap, I would watch SmackDown every week for the rest of my life. And since we know that'll never happen, I do not have to eat those words. So fuck you. So they're showing the full match. DiBiase is going over everything that happens, including the moments where he's working over Conway. He does still point out that he's a very formidable opponent, so it's not a total outright burial. And as Conway starts milking the comeback, he goes up for a diving headbutt, but gets blocked by DiBiase's fists, and that leaves enough time for him to load the glove and clock Conway in the head to get the 3 count. Obviously with him denying that he used any gimmick to win the match. His claim was, all I was trying to do was catch my breath. I'll bet he was. So yeah, this was pretty great. Boyd Pierce doesn't even try to dispute anything. That's the best part. Like, he knows this guy's full of shit. He doesn't need to argue anything he obviously lied about. He just needs to sit there and let Ted be a heel. A lying heel at that. Because that's what heels do, right? They lie. They cheat. They steal. Where have I heard that one before? So at that point, we were basically halfway through the program. We've now seen a 10-minute clip from a Houston spot show and a video replay of Tony Atlas bench pressing. So naturally, we come back for a Skandar Akbar interview with Reeser Bowden. Good old Captain Charisma himself. And, well, this is where we were informed about the General's whereabouts. He had been previously absent from Mid-South Television. Turns out he was acquiring the services of the Ugandan warrior Kamala for a large sum of money. Because obviously that's something Kamala would care about. And he's here to let us know that the buck stops with him and Kamala. He's the only beast to effectively beat the Junkyard Dog with no outside interference. So people in the Mid-South region think JYD is the final boss on their path to success. They need to think again. Kamala is the real last stop. And it was indeed the last stop for Kamala's opponent this week, El Silencio, who was indeed silencioed by the end of this squash. Not only was this job geek defeated, broken, and battered, they also immediately killed his gimmick by having Kamala rip off his mask and hand it over to the General. So it would seem El Silencio was not long for this world. But that does play into story development, because after Kamala gave him the mask, Akbar grabbed the microphone at the booth and promised that Kamala would be revealing every masked man in the Mid-South area, up to and including Mr. Olympia and Mr. Wrestling 2. So watch out, boys. The Ugandan warrior is a prize hunter now. I did love this. Right as Akbar laid out the threat and walked away, Boyd Pierce has to let us know, folks, this is just a general message to let you know. Akbar was not invited to the table this week for commentary. We apologize for the disturbance of the peace. Because the commentary booth is a sacred place, you see. Not just one of those places you can freely walk over to and interrupt without invitation. More lessons modern wrestling could benefit from. So then we had Mr. Olympia and Iron Mike Sharp versus John and Rick Davidson from Fort Worth. I don't know why I found that noteworthy, but I wrote it down. So they were obviously brothers. Between the both of them, I don't think either of them could have been any more than $150. They had matching black singlets, unkempt bodies. I'm pretty sure the blonde one had hair in places I didn't even know could grow hair. Oh yeah, and they fucking sucked in the ring. That was also key. Pretty basic stuff, aside from those other minute details I just mentioned. Olympia and Sharp used a lot of quick tags in and out. Ended up with Sharp making a fiery comeback, and then Olympia came down off the top rope with a body press for the 3. I think we've seen a couple Olympia Sharp tag matches. They weren't really recognized as an ongoing pair in Mid-South, so it might have just been a way to get them on the card. But I know there's some pretty big story stuff coming up with Olympia that we need to track on our radars. But most of that doesn't come into play until like the very beginning of 83. Then we had Mr. Wrestling 2 versus Marty Lundy with Double A's worst look yet. Remember when I was roasting Arn for wrestling in the amateur singlet? Talking about how the look didn't work? Well, good news. He got rid of the singlet. Now he has regular black trunks. Bad news. He now has a porn stash. Negative 5-star look. Now, luckily, Arn grew facial hair pretty quickly, so I'm hoping this doesn't last longer than a month or so, because, yeah. There are very, very few men that ever pulled off the simple mustache look in wrestling. To be frank, if your name was not Rick Rude or Manny Fernandez, fail. Maybe Hector Guerrero, too. I know Wrestling 2 didn't approve of the look, because he beat the shit out of this poor guy. Just whipped him from pillar to post here. Popped him with a knee lift out of the corner, cut him right in the jaw. And after several minutes of tossing Arn around and whipping him like a government mule, he gives Arn 2 successive knee lifts for the pin. Which I guess counts for something, that they let Arn survive not 1 running knee lift, but 2. Yeah. Good stuff. I think Arn will be better off when he grows the beard back. So coming back, we had Bob Roop and Mike Bond in the most boring, nothing-happening squash of all time. I wrote nothing down about it. I couldn't get over Bill Watts' line in this segment while he was talking about JYD. He explains that John May, one of the Arkansas promoters, was promising JYD a prize-winning watermelon the next time he's in the area doing publicity. Well, we will chalk that up to different times. I don't think I need to say any more. Southern humor. What can you do? Roop won with the world's worst brainbuster. He is also back from another extended paid vacation. That makes, I believe, 2 consecutive paid vacations for Bob Roop since the point we started these Mid-South reviews. And we've only been doing them for what, 2 months? So if my math is correct, that would mean Bob would have been on Mid-South programming for a sum total of about 2 or 3 weeks since then. Maybe he needed to work off some of that PTO. And then for our remaining bit of TV time, we get a quick little standby with Hiro Matsuda and Yoshiatsu versus Tim Horner and King Cobra. I can also confirm, after my comment about Double A's mustache, Tim Horner also has a full-fledged porn stash. And it is indeed equally as disturbing as Arn's. Maybe even more, just because it's Tim Horner. Action was pretty fast-paced, considering the limitations they had with the time window. We did not get a winner by the end, but Matsuda and Yatsu were very much in control. Just a quick way to fill some time before the show expired. Nothing wrong with it, just not much to say because it only went like 90 seconds. Honestly, most of the show is pretty skippable as I look back. You know, after the DiBiase segment and some of the Akbar commentary on the Kamala story, the rest of the show is just kind of there this week. Very minimal story advancement with the top guys, but they are definitely pushing the Devastation Inc. stuff now. Kamala is promising to rip off some masks. So, maybe that'll tie into Mr. Wrestling 2's story. Because y'all remember, he came out last week, and he did that promo after someone defamed his mask and smudged a bunch of green paint all over it. Now you got Kamala running around threatening to rip off people's masks. So maybe there's a hidden agenda in there. I'm thinking Wrestling 2 might have a bone to pick with the General, because he might have the scoop. But I guess we'll wait and see. So that takes us to World Class. This is the tape delay of Thanksgiving Star Wars from 1984. Obviously not the full card, but similar to how World Class airs these shows, they kind of break everything up into episodes. And I knew we were in for something special this week, when what's the first thing we see right out of the gate? A TV mature audiences warning, where I am told that this episode contains strong violence and material that may not be suited for younger audiences. I was told the parental control block function was easily accessible. So my first inclination, what the fuck did Stella Mae French do? Did she finally run down Gino Hernandez in the parking lot with her semi-truck? No, it turns out she was not the culprit of the violence. We will talk about the nature of the graphic content this week when we talk about the Texas Death Match. Because yes, there indeed was a Texas Death Match on this program. I actually thought the graphic footage was going to come out of the opening match. Missing Link and Buck Zumhoff. Just because of how horrific it was going to be. Now, if there's ever a time to put the channel block on for the kids and say, no, Timmy, you don't want to watch this. It's too horrible for your eyes to contain. I wouldn't blame you. The Reunion Arena fans got the shaft here. I'd have rioted to get my money back if I paid a ticket to see this fucking thing live. You kidding me? Buck Zumhoff versus the Missing Link? To be fair, it was only horrible for 2 minutes. The entire match consisted of like 3 moves. Shitty punches from Zumhoff, shitty headbutts from Link, and a semi-okay looking dropkick from Zumhoff. And then he made the comeback on Link and ate a headbutt from out of nowhere for the pin. The only other thing I wrote was geek in giant bold font. I think that was directed toward Buck Zumhoff, but I'm not entirely sure. So yeah, that sucked. Total waste of 3 minutes. But it was a warm-up for what I believe was the true rationale for the TVMA warning. A Texas death between Killer Khan and Terry Gordy. And I'll tell you what, man. After reading and hearing the numerous reports about that abomination of a Hangman Page Swerve Strickland match from that AEW pay-per-view, when I saw Texas death here, I thought, too soon. Now, thankfully, this was not Tony Khan's phony concept of what a Texas death match is. It was the real deal. An actual Texas death in Texas with the correct rules and regulations. So, maybe Tony ought to go through his tape trade library and see if he can find any world-class footage, get a proper sense of what a real Texas death match is supposed to be. Now, for those that are not well informed, I will give you the actual proper stipulations for the traditional Texas death. It is no time limit. Pinfalls can happen anywhere in the building. When a wrestler's shoulders are pinned to the mat, the wrestler will have a 30-second rest period, at which point, after the grace period, he will then have to reach his feet before the count of 10. And if he cannot beat the 10 count, then he loses the fall and the match. So anybody that's been trained to think Texas death is another word for last man standing, incorrect. You have been bamboozled. Now, with that said, was this as bloody and or gory as the Page Swerve match? No. Or Gordy and Khan leaning over each other, drinking each other's fluids out of styrofoam cups like dipshit Page and screwy Swerve were? No. So by that logic, I guess it means it didn't get over with the ECW marks because it wasn't badass enough. Because, you know, drinking people's blood, that is now apparently badass. Now, I can promise you one thing. Terry Bam Bam Gordy will always be more badass than any AEW talent put together. And I will go to the grave saying that. I should add, Kerry Von Erich was the special guest referee here. Why? I have absolutely no idea. Apparently because David Manning and Bronco Lubick were not equipped for the job. They would not have been able to stomach the violence. But it definitely lived up to the hype of being both violent and somewhat gory. It was absolutely a bloodbath. We had the double juice in effect here. So by the time the actual match was over, they had turned the blue ring mat essentially purple. And, you know, before I break down the notable takeaways, since we are dealing with a relatively timely event, and that whole Page Swerve match that's been so controversial, I want to try and draw some similarities between this version of a Texas death versus the modern incorrect interpretation of Texas death. How many times have I come on here and complained about how much I loathe and detest hardcore wrestling anymore? Where the whole thing just turns into a crash dummy furniture match, where everyone's just bumping through gimmicks and hitting each other with shit over and over again. And then you compare all of that to something like this. Because in addition to it being a grudge match with two guys that had a heated rivalry, it fits the nature of a Texas death. You're going to involve blood. That goes without saying. That's kind of a given. But you want to know what this match didn't need in order to be a great physical no DQ match? Do you know what it didn't require? Chairs. ladders, tables, fire, barbed wire, fucking forks, fucking glass, screwdrivers, whatever off-the-shelf Home Depot items you can get your hands on. Here's what they needed to make this a great Texas death match: physicality, a pair of blades, and a ring post. And facials. Yes, Gordy was busted open from asshole to appetite. Yes, Killer Khan was bleeding from the back of the skull. Yes, they did intentionally do blade jobs here to get the point across. But you want to know what it looked like? A real fucking worked fight. Like two guys that hated each other's guts, wanted to rip each other's eyeballs out. They went in there, beat the living crap out of each other. Didn't need gimmicks to tell the story. And it's why I've come to loathe and despise everything about anything goes, no DQ, street fight matches, whatever we're calling the concept of hardcore wrestling in 2023. I hate it. I hate it all. Both those War Games matches at the Survivor Series show were just nonstop jackass stunts. Because that's the problem, too. They're all just interchangeable. Every single modern anything goes, no DQ, no holds barred, street fight, whatever you want to call it. There's nothing unique about them. There's nothing stand out. You never actually believe that people hitting each other with the weapons actually legitimately despise the other. No, man. This is the kind of wrestling where if you're going to do stuff like this, if you're going to do a Texas death, there has to be a reason for it. And what's the match about? It's about selling the art of the story through facials and exhaustion and pain. Where you look at the guys involved and they're physically tearing into each other, and it looks like they are legitimately going out there to try to kill each other. How have we totally lost that art form in today's business? When you get Gordy thrown into the ring post and he comes out bleeding profusely from the head, or the nose, as Bill Mercer understated. He's wobbling around just trying to wield himself to stand up. You get the dramatic moments where Kerry's initiating the count after the grace period and Gordy and Khan are struggling with everything they have to break the count. And because the match gets more and more heated, like Kerry actually has to get physically involved. He's prying guys apart by their hair, pushing them back, shoving them into the corner so he can actually initiate the 10 count. And of course, it all culminates where Gordy's about to win, but General Akbar hits the ring at like a 7 or an 8 count, forcing Kerry to abruptly stop. And while he and Gordy are going after Akbar in the corner, here comes the missing link from behind to jump them both. And you get the whole fight scene where Gordy and Kerry are actually working together to fend off Akbar's heels. And that's a moment in and of itself, going off their history together. And then we get that awesome moment afterwards where Kerry awards the match to Gordy by forfeit, basically. Because he even got on the house mic and said, had Akbar not interfered, Gordy still would have won the match. And as he goes to shake Gordy's hand, Gordy won't do it. So, Kerry's about to leave, and he says, all right, whatever. It's just trying to put the story to rest, but if you don't want to, that's your prerogative. But then Gordy grabs the house mic, and he goes, hey, Kerry, if you got the guts, you'll get back in the ring right now. And right as it looks like those guys are about to come to blows, it's Gordy that extends the hand. Crowd shits their pants. What a moment. Gordy's a bloody mess, just totally battered and broken down. But he's man enough to bury the hatchet with his longtime rival, in this case, a now former heel, extending the olive branch. And I think that's why I got over. Because when the Freebirds were feuding with the Von Erichs, they were the most hated group in the entire region. But it all comes full circle here. And here's the thing, too. They don't have to be friends. But as a singular sign of respect, that sure counts for something, doesn't it? The professional reverence between two guys that might not like each other on a personal level, but they can respect each other's accomplishments. It's great. Everything about this is like easily one of the best things in world class all year. Great match, great angle where Kerry and Gordy finally go do the handshake and bury the hatchet. It's easily one of the most gruesome world-class matches I think we've ever reviewed. Am I right? I mean, we haven't talked about a whole lot of Texas death matches from what I remember. We definitely have not seen this much juice. But after seeing it, I can definitely understand the Peacock doing the graphic content warning. I mean, if you're not accustomed to seeing so much juice, I can kind of see why it would be disturbing. But, well, trust me, I've watched plenty of ECW clips throughout my life. Nothing phases me at this point. I have a pretty strong stomach. So then we go from that to a Sunshine promo, which is basically like switching the station from Fear Factor to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. We go from blood, gore, violence, pain to sweet old Sunshine with her pearly white smile, letting us know that she's back to support her auntie Stella May, because she'll be wrestling Andrea the Lady Giant. Ugh. But she doesn't want to give away too much, but she does have a surprise in store, even though she's only been back for a cup of coffee. I don't know, we'll see where that goes. They're going to need a lot of smoke and mirrors to get something watchable out of Stella Mae French versus Baby Doll. That has Jenna Charmel levels of entering horrible written all over it. And then up next, we had Gino Hernandez versus Mike Von Erich. Speaking of horrible in-ring work, Gino would have been better off wrestling the wet mop in the broom closet. It's actually probably the best way to describe what Mike looks like in the ring. A wet mop. And I'm not just making fun of the haircut. So they're in there wrestling for a few minutes. It's really bad. Mike legitimately could not do a headlock convincingly. Gets to the point where Gino just gives up trying and starts doing everything as slow as humanly possible just to try to guide the kid along and call spots. And, Gino goes up and misses an elbow drop. They do the restraint spot on the apron where Lady Giant tries to hold back Mike so Gino can come off the ropes and catch him with the knee to the gut. You'll never guess. Mike broke free of this woman's grasp. Shocking. And they build to the finish where Gino catches Mike with a suplex. Goes for the pin. Mike has his foot on the bottom rope, though, but Andrea shoves it off right before Bronco's 3 count. So Mike gets screwed over initially. And because, in the land of world class, they can never just let the heels get their fucking heat without immediately taking it away, here comes David Manning to spoil the party and tell Bronco that Gino cheated. So take a wild guess as to what happened. Yep. You guessed it. Reverse decision. Mike wins by DQ. Isn't it great where you can just take the referee's word for it? Bronco didn't even have to think twice. He just said, no, he's got a good point. Gino is a bad guy. Of course he would try to cheat to win. Mike is the winner. Of course, this was back before heel referees were a thing, so I guess it makes sense. Those infamous Montreal screw jobs were not popularized quite yet. Terrible match. But the people popped for the reverse decision, even though it was Mike. And then for our TV main event this week, a tag team match, playa. Jake Roberts and Kelly Kiniski, a.k.a. the teacher and the pupil, versus the Iceman and Kerry Von Erich. As we remember from the previous episode, Jake decided to take Kelly under his wing and train him. He thought he could offer some of that veteran advice, help him grow in this business and make a main eventer out of him. Well, I regret to inform you, his advice did not pay off. Fast forward about 2 or 3 years, Kiniski was out of the business entirely and never wrestled a day in his life. For whatever reason, though, this match had a ton of heat. The crowd was incredibly into it, and they were drowning out Mercer's commentary at various points. And it was all pretty basic stuff per world-class standards. A little bit of babyface flurry at the beginning. Heat on the Iceman. Right before the Iceman was about to tag Kerry, Roberts hits the ring and attacks the Iceman from behind. So while the heels are doing the handicap beatdown, Kerry jumps in to even the odds. And during the four-way, we had Jake dumping the Iceman over the top rope to the floor. And while the heels are ganging up on Kerry, the Iceman snuck back in and pinned Kiniski with a sunset pin. And right before the cutaway, Jake was admonishing Kelly on the floor and calling him a piece of shit. No, I'm just kidding. He didn't actually use the word shit. But he was definitely raking him over the coals. I like that. They are already teasing the breakup after 2 weeks. Kelly Kiniski was such a worthless pro wrestler. Jake Roberts had already had it with him after 2 weeks. But, yeah, I mean, kind of an odd main event for the show. I mean, that Texas Death was far and away better than this. And it just kind of got shoehorned into the middle of the program. This was more so about furthering along whatever's going on with the whole Kelly-Jake story. I think Kerry and the Iceman were just kind of there as damage control, but it served a purpose. I mean, it's a total one-match show, but that Texas Death is absolutely going out of your way to see. The blood, I know, is always going to be a little squeamish for people. Trust me, it's not that bad. Again, I've seen just about every gross thing in wrestling there is to see. I watched a guy break his leg on a live WCW pay-per-view where the limb completely snapped off the bone. I mean, I can stomach a little bit of juice here and there. It wasn't like Eddie Guerrero blade botch from the early 2000s where the entire ring canvas was dark red by the time the match was over. It was just really messy. But, now there you go. Part 1 of the Thanksgiving Star Wars special is in the books. And now we'll see how things carry over in the next couple weeks. And that'll also round out this Friday edition of the FSWR podcast. So thanks everybody for stopping in, and make sure you come back on Monday as we'll be doing the Retro Raw, the Retro NXT, and the WWE Friday Night SmackDown program where, fingers crossed, maybe we'll get a Punk cameo? Possibly. One could hope. We'll see. I hope it doesn't become exclusive to Raw, because that would kind of suck. But well, they definitely got a lot going on with the lead into Rumble season in January, so hey, they got the people talking. And that's all you can do. Draw up the publicity and keep the ball rolling. So, cool. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Peace out.